Thank you. I'd just like to talk a little bit today about a sustainable Sydney agriculture and look at just how important the basin's agriculture is to Sydney. Now, I'd like to quickly just go over an overview of Sydney's farms and the current developments. Look at some of the things we're going to need to have sustainable farming within the city. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Western Sydney Parklands Trust, and then maybe some opportunities for farming and looking at how we can establish some points of difference and different ways of marketing. Now, the Sydney Basin is perhaps unique, or not totally unique, but it varies from many of the other capital cities in that it's constrained on three sides by mountains and we're on the ocean on the fourth. Now, most other large cities can continue to expand, they keep getting bigger and bigger. Sydney doesn't have that opportunity because it's always going to be surrounded by those barriers. Now, everybody politically has been talking about wanting to preserve agricultural land in Sydney pretty much since the 1920s. In 1947, for example, was when we started the County of Cumberland consolidation. A great premise. It was at this time that most of the freeways in the Sydney Basin were planned and allowed for, but we ended up with 128,000 hectares of agricultural land disappearing with freeways, and then the best thing you can do alongside freeways is to start subdividing land into 5-acre blocks, which instead of being farms were turned into lifestyle acreages so that people could jump in their cars and drive back into the cities. 1959, we had the Carl government looking for land that could be released for development. Very shortly after that, though, we were outlining the Sydney Regional Outline Plan, which had agriculture playing a strong role. But by 1976, in the south, again, we've got the MacArthur Growth Centre, and we're taking up farmland for an extra 40,000 people down there. By 1984, the fruit industry is steadily withdrawing from the fringes of Sydney. Vegetable grower numbers declining to about 30%, and the poultry industry numbers also starting to fall away. Come forward to 95, the Premier has a task force on market gardening by people from non-English speaking backgrounds. At that point, we seem to be having some concerns that our several waves of migrants coming through may not be giving us the food that we really think we need. So we had a background task force to look at that. By 98, there are reports coming out saying that there's 10,000 hectares of Sydney Basin land left that's devoted to market gardening alone. Under the Carr government, we had a priority for protecting primary production from competing demands on resources, minimise the conflicts from incursions of incompatible land uses, which gets us closer to where we are now. The Yemma government, once we've decided on the northwest and southwest growth centres, Sydney has to keep growing, and that's why I've been unapologetic supporter of new releases of land on the Sydney outskirts, and the plan goes on. Currently we are looking at reviewing the Metro plan, but again, agricultural land needs to be definitely identified and protected from development processes through planning policies, but the next wave of development, as we need to put houses on blocks, you can be sure we'll basically override a lot of that again. So whilst everyone has their hearts in the right place, unfortunately we're seeing more and more of that land disappearing under houses. Now, to try and get a bit of rationality to this, a couple of my staff, Peter Malcolm and Riyad Fard, looked at surveying the Sydney vegetable industry in 2008. Now basically they just did Google Earth search and then used GPS coordinates to drive around the basin and identify where the farms were. Now, what they found was total area in greenhouse, outdoor hydroponic vegetables is around the 2,000 hectares. The total number of vegetable farms is about a bit over 1,000, and the average size that gives you there is about 1.9 to 2 hectares. admittedly ranging from 0.1 up to about 60 hectares. Now, in New South Wales, the average vegetable farm is run on about 21 hectares, and that is considerably smaller than the rest of Australia, which has an average of about 40 hectares. Now, farmers on 21 hectares, in many cases, are really struggling to make ends meet. Farmers on 40 hectares have some sustainability and scale, but I really struggle with someone on less than 2 hectares trying to make some sort of a living under the current marketing systems. Now, if we have a look there, the two white areas on that map, a large number of the farms smack bang in the middle of those southern and northern growth centres. And in fact, those two growth centres take out about 600 of the existing farms in the Sydney Basin at the moment. But you'll see a nice belt, again, almost following the inner line of the M7 freeway. New South Wales has about 33% of Australia's total population and produces about 12% of the veggies. Data suggests from ABS that more than 85% of the veggies sold in Sydney come from outside the Sydney region. People have come to expect that they can have tomatoes 12 months of the year. And the start of the season, those tomatoes will be coming from North Queensland, steadily moving down around the coast. By the time you get to the end of the season, they're coming out of South Australia. A very small percentage actually being produced within the Sydney Basin. And if you talk to Sydney markets, they'll indicate that about 2.5% of the produce sold in the Sydney markets actually comes from Sydney. The rest is coming from all over the rest of Australia, and in some cases even imported. So at the moment, we've got about 115,000 tonnes of veggies being produced on 2,000 hectares. We have a population that's steadily increasing and a large number of small producers that under the current system are really struggling. Now, we've got small farm size. With the current marketing situation, this is not going to be viable into the future. We have an ageing demographic of farmers, and their kids are just not interested in seeing how hard mum and dad have worked. The last thing I want to do now is take over the family farm. But within all of that, there are still some opportunities. We have the Western Sydney Parklands Trust, which is government-owned land lining up along the M7, which has potential and plans to bring about another 500 hectares into production. We have the floodplains around here, the Windsor, Richmond floodplains, which can't go under houses, may not arguably be the best farming land, but in the past this land was good farming land. Now people are using it to grow turf and horses because there's more money in growing grass for your front lawn than there is in growing veggies for your belly. It's crazy. But what's going to be needed are alternative marketing systems, web-based farmers markets, finding niche ways of marketing, clean and green. We've got a market of 5 million people sitting on the doorstep here in Sydney, and that's what needs to be targeted. But if you look there, the Western Sydney Parklands Trust basically is a corridor of land running north-south following the M7. It's essentially a services corridor, so there's the power lines going from Wollongong up to Newcastle run through there, the gas mains run through there, the freeway runs through there. But there's capability, there's about 150 hectares of that land currently is farming. The aim is to take that up to 500, but at the moment, even though they're advertising at the moment for land for lease, anywhere between a 3-year lease to a 25-year lease, depending on the farming operation, and nobody's falling over themselves to take it up. Why? Because there's just not perceived at the moment the wherewithal within the system to do it. Again, basically it's broken up into 16 different precincts, Prospect Reservoir sitting there out on the right-hand side, but running right from the north, basically following the M7 through. And as I was saying earlier, the other land we have is this land up the top here, the floodplain areas around this area, which potentially can be converted. When it becomes profitable to start growing vegetables again, we can convert that land from turf growing back into food production. But we have an increasing demand for sustainability. People want to eat healthy food. People are looking for something, as Martin was just saying, cut down on the amount of pesticides, cut down on the amount of chemicals, organic production, community gardens. People are looking for a relationship with a grower. They're looking for an experience rather than just going to a supermarket and taking what's on the shelf. Local farmers markets. People want their kids to know where their food's coming from. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have at the moment. We've got potential 5 million customers in Sydney looking for local, green, clean food. Even if it's 10% of that market at the moment, that's still more than enough market for the current people to operate. Are the supermarkets going to change? I don't think so. The thing that frightens me most, I suppose, is who is actually going to win the supermarket war, because we've got the most concentrated supermarket powers of any country at the moment, and if one or the other actually wins that war, it's going to be a frightening situation. We've got the opportunities for farmers markets to continue and expand, food trails, online marketing, food boxes. Even people like Australia Post now are starting to realise that logistics is going to be the important thing in the future. They're starting to look at refrigerated post office boxes so you can have your food delivered and remain a little bit fresher in a refrigerated box. Community gardens, getting people backyard gardens and homegrown foods. And again, I keep reiterating, we've got 5 million people, customers sitting on the doorstep. So the challenge, I think, is to make sure that farmers and consumers are both getting a fair return. Once there's some profit into the system, community development will follow and grow, but without getting some of that moving now, within the next 20 years, we're just going to see a continual contraction of urban farming and urban farming practices, because there's no sense in preserving land that nobody can make a living out of. Thank you.